Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Darren Potty. I'm a guest curator for the Portrait Gallery of Canada. Today, I'm thrilled to present a presentation by artist Zinnia Naqvi. Naqvi is one of 19 artists in the current digital exhibition, In Keeping with Myself. Zinnia is an interdisciplinary artist based in Montreal and Toronto. Her work examines issues of colonialism, cultural translation, language, and gender through the use of photography, video, writing, and archival material. Recent works include archival and restage images, experimental documentary films, video installations, graphic design, and elaborate still lives. Her works often invite the viewer to question her process and working methods. Naqvi's work has been shown across Canada and internationally. She is a recipient of the 2019 New Generation Photography Award, organized by the Canadian Photography Institute of the National Gallery of Canada, and was awarded an honorable mention of 2017 Karachi Biennale in Pakistan. Zinnia, thank you so much for being here. I'm so thrilled to hear a little bit more about your practice, your process, and a little bit more about the kind of exciting projects you have coming up.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, thank you so much to the Portrait Gallery of Canada for having me and for inviting me to be part of this exhibition, and Darren for selecting my works to be in keeping with myself. Yeah, I'm joining you from Takaranto, Toronto. I'm going to be talking about some of my recent works. And yeah, I'll just get started. So I'm going to share my screen. Yeah. So I'm going to start by speaking about the project that's included in this exhibition, which is called Dear Nannies. So I have one diptych that was selected to be part of this exhibition, but it's from a longer series. So this project called Dear Nani is a project which looks at found images of my nani, which is what I called my maternal grandmother, so my mother's mother, in which I had found these images of her actually cross-dressed, and she was engaging in gender play. These images were taken in 1948, which is the year that my grandparents were married, and also a year after the partition of India and Pakistan. So I'll go into a bit of context about how I came about the project and how I started it before I go into more details there. So I found these images. I have a history of working with the Family Archive in a lot of my work. It's a place for me that just became generative for various reasons, but I tend to return to my personal family archive to look at my own sort of past history, my family's history, and understand how, migration patterns and also things like citizenship, manifest into my lived everyday reality. But also like sometimes looking at more subtle and more, different parts of details in the images that kind of bring out different larger societal issues or different contexts like this. So when I started this project called Dear Nani, I had a history of working with the family album. And because my family knew that I liked to work with the album, my aunt, my mom's sister, actually had this album that was in her basement and it had been flooded. And so there was some damage to the album. So she gave it to me to rehouse all of the images. So I took the original, so this is in the back, you can see the original album, and then this is a new album that I was starting to place all the images in. And so a lot of the images were, yellow and faded, and a lot of them had been stuck together with 60-year-old Scotch tape that I had to then carefully pull apart. So I was doing my little archive work at the time. And then within this album, I found the images in question, so the photos of my grandmother in which she was dressed up in male clothing. And the images were not a secret. So my mom knew about them, her sister knew about them. My mom has a brother and sister, and they knew about the images, but due to the kind of relationship they had with their parents, they never dared to ask about the images because they had a pretty formal relationship. My grandmother was a pretty quiet person. She has so much life in the images, but I mean, she had a lot of life in person too, but she actually was quite reserved and kept to herself. My grandfather, I never met. He passed away before I was born. But just kind of due to the societal norms at the time, they had a fairly formal relationship with their parents and wouldn't have dared to ask them exactly what was happening in the image. But me being well, first of all, my grandparents had passed away, so I wasn't able to directly ask them about the photos, but also being sort of curious myself, I felt, the photos were so arresting, and they were so, I knew they were so spectacular and so rare. And because I had a history of working with archives, I knew that I kind of had to make a project about these photos in particular. So the project kind of called me. I just happened to kind of stumble across some really incredible source material. So as I was mentioning, my family is from Pakistan, but of course, India and Pakistan used to be part of the same country. So the two countries separated in 1947 when India gained independence from Great Britain. So I just wanted to include a little map just in case anyone's not familiar. So my family is from Karachi, which you can see here. So this part of, so I guess I should specify my mom's family is from Karachi and had been in Karachi for a few generations. So the photos in question were taken in 1948. So my mom's family was not directly affected by partition because they're Muslim and they were already in the kind of Muslim majority part of the nation. My father's family, on the other hand, was actually in like what was then known as East Pakistan, or they had moved all across the subcontinent, as many people did. There was a lot of migration within the subcontinent when the country split up. But my mom's family and her parents were already situated in this area. So most of the photos in question were taken in Karachi. Some of them were taken in Quetta, which is in this area. It's not directly on the map, but it's in the northwest sort of frontier area that's on the border of Afghanistan, which is a more kind of mountainous, more green area, where unlike Karachi, which is more of a sort of dry desert climate. So what I know about these photos comes from what I know about my grandparents and what the socio-political context of when the photos were taken. But as they weren't alive anymore, I couldn't directly ask them about what was happening in the photos. So my grandparents were married in the year 1948. That was the year after partition. They were both upper middle class Bora Muslims. This was actually my grandmother's second marriage, and she had been previously divorced. What I know from what my mom, I know from about the photos from what my mom has told me about them, and that we believe she's wearing her husband's clothes. And we also believe that it was my nana's, who was the photographer in this photo session. So he was the one taking the pictures of his new bride. And also very likely because due to what we know from the two of their personalities, that it was possibly his idea to engage in the dress up. But yeah, it was really like, although Nani is the one who's pictured in a lot of the images, my grandfather, my Nana, is also a participant, and he's a very active sort of part of this cosplay gender play that's going on there. You can see in the photo in the back that that's actually a portrait of my grandfather. So we know that these photos, some of the photos were taken in Karachi at my grandfather's home. Whereas if I go back to the previous photo, so this photo, according to my mom's information that she gave me, was taken on their honeymoon, which was in Quetta. My grandparents would have gone there because it was kind of, again, a lush mountainous region, different from where they were living. And the people in the background of these images, we don't know who they are, but they are most likely some distant family members. As you can see, they're like not super concerned with this dress up. So that also kind of leads us to believe that it was a sort of like fun-loving thing. Not so, I wouldn't say out of the ordinary, but there's a few things. Of course, it's kind of definitely a fun and spectacular thing that they were engaged in, but there's a few reasons as to why I believe they decided to dress up together. First and foremost, I think they were just having fun and maybe a little bit sexy even, they were on their honeymoon. So that's kind of the main reason. And then there's some sort of political and reasons as well that I'll get to in a minute. But as I didn't have access to actually speak with my grandmother about the images, and because there is something so striking about the photos, But I also felt like it was important to give some context, some factual context as to what was happening in the images. And so the way I chose to do this was to write a dialogue between my grandmother and I. So you'll notice that the photos are often accompanied with a dialogue. So this dialogue is written by me. So it's not directly an interview, but it's a fictional interview. So I'm answering the questions. I'm asking my nanny the questions, and then she's kind of answering me based in the way that I believe she would answer me if she was still alive. And so in a lot of the answers, she's giving me kind of facts, but sometimes she's also kind of dismissing my questions. You'll see that as we go forward. So she is giving me facts, but sometimes I'll ask her like, why did this happen? And then she'll say, I don't know, I don't remember. And that's because I wanted to maintain a little bit of like element of mystery to the kind of performance. And also I think that if she were to be alive and I was to ask her about these photos, just the way that, you know, my mom never dared ask her, like, even if I did dare to ask her, I don't think she would tell me, because it was a private thing between her and her new husband. And I don't think you necessarily want to talk to your grandkids about that. So I wanted to maintain a bit of privacy as well in the work. And so that's how I chose to do that. Yeah, it was kind of a beautiful moment between the two people. And I wanted to kind of keep that for them a little bit as well. So in the project, I'm engaging, so, you know, sometimes I show large scale reproductions of the photos, whereas other times I'm engaging with the original artifacts as well. The original photos are like silver gelatin prints. And as you can see in this image, they're about 2 by 3 inches. They're really tiny. So yeah, sometimes they're blown up to see the details, but I also wanted to make it clear in the project that I was working with original material. In the background of some of the photos is remnants of children, other children. So in the first image, you saw that there were 2 young girls and a father figure in the back. Sometimes in parts of these images, you see little legs, little people hiding under furniture. That's not quite noticeable right away. But so I've included myself in the project, and I've often included myself mimicking the posing, sometimes of Nani, but also of these kids who are in the background. The reason that I did that is because I see myself as one of these kids who was probably kind of hiding and looking as to what these adults were doing and wanting to engage in the fun, but also not fully understanding what they were doing. So they're kind of bystanders, and they're trying to kind of make sense or understand this performance that's happening in front of them. And so I sort of see myself in that place of being, you know, grandchild of these people and trying to understand them in a way that I never could before. So you can see that Nani's poses, she's taken on some very particular poses. She's dressed in different outfits. So some of them are more kind of traditional. So this is what we would call a sherwani, which is more, you know, traditional East Indian clothing. So a long jacket and shalwar, which is like loose kind of pajama pants, and a turban. Sometimes she's wearing a mustache or sunglasses. And then sometimes she's dressed in a more European suit. Like in this image, she's kind of dressed in a safari outfit. So there was, yeah, quite an elaborate performance that happened between the 2 of them. And yeah, I mean, they're just a joy to look at. But of course, also the variations in her clothing made me think about the political and the specifically like the colonial context of the gender performance that they were engaging in, because this was the year after partition, which was a huge, you know, disrupt to their lives, to everything, you know, they knew in terms of where they lived and the, you know, nationhood. But also it was a bit of an exciting time as well, because there was this new independence of Pakistan, India, this new kind of hope for a future of sovereignty. And also that kind of came with different hope for, you know, new rights for women and new places for women also. And so I do believe that there's some of that occurring in the performances as well. Whether it was conscious or subconscious for my grandparents, I'm not really sure, but I, as a kind of 2 generations removed, am also reading that into to their pose and to the performance that was happening. One of the main indicators as well to this performance, or to the especially the political and colonial context of the time, was that this dictionary that Nani is holding in her hand. I have this set of dictionaries actually. So they were really special dictionaries to my family. So my parents immigrated to Canada in the early 90s and brought some special items, but they're very sentimental in terms of objects, which is really lucky for me because I end up using a lot of them in my work. And so she brought these set of dictionaries, colonial dictionaries, that belonged to my grandfather. So they were a set of British English dictionaries that were given to my grandfather by an English teacher, and he loved them, and my mom and her siblings also loved them as kids. So she brought them to Canada with her when she moved. So of course, when I saw that Nani was holding this dictionary in her hand, I turned and went back to my parents' house and had to pick up one of these dictionaries and look at them again. And they are really beautiful documents. They have really beautiful color illustrations. But for me, looking at them with, studying kind of the way images disseminate, and especially like an interest in kind of colonialism or post-colonialism, or I'm reading a lot of racism and problematic imagery into the works, into the photos as well. And this was a dictionary that was made for children, and it says in the beginning printed in India, Burma, and Ceylon. So it's meant for Asian kids, but it has all of these kind of ideals of British values. And so this illustration here, it says gifts of other lands to the English language. And so all of these different people from all of these other different lands are offering up their goods for these two British children. And it's kind of this whole idea of the British Empire, everyone from around the world is giving their precious goods for the collective British Empire, was often the narrative there, but then it wasn't always very equal. Obviously, some people benefited more from others from these gifts. So those are the kind of things I'm reading into them. Similarly, there's this illustration for the words like Occident, which is also not a word we tend to use a lot anymore, but so the definition of Occident, and we have there's a illustration with the description underneath that says Chinese superintendent in Occidentalized clothing. So this kind of differentiation between someone who's dressed in British clothes, and as well, you'll see that the way that this man is posed in his Western clothing is quite stiff, and the posing is also very reminiscent to the way that Nani is posing in a lot of her portraits. She's taking on this very particular stance, or very particular way that she frames her body for the camera. And this is kind of where I think she's getting these ideas from, is images like this, or the way that men are supposed to present themselves, or especially gentlemen, or are supposed to just kind of stand up in society and look dignified and all those things. So I'm also reading those connotations into the work. So it's things like this. When I look at the dictionaries, these kind of make me, or bring me to the conclusion, if I had a thesis about this work, this is what it is. Although Nani is performing the role of a man in the cross-dressing that she's engaging with, I do also believe that she's not only performing the role of only a man, but also an Indian man who is performing the role of a British man. And she's displaying the ideals of British citizenship through her gender performance, and enacting also the role of her husband. So my grandfather, my Nana, was upper middle class, and he would have been educated in British schools. And so these were also the kind of ideals that he was taught of ways to dress and ways to perform in society. And that's also kind of being translated onto her, in that she's mimicking him in the performance of dressing up in his clothes. So this is kind of where I'm getting these ideas from, and thinking about the larger implications of also gender, but also colonialism, especially. I think they're really hand in hand in this project. And I just think these photos are really first evidence of that. So when I show these works in public or in exhibition format, I like to show the original images alongside reproductions of the images in order to just kind of also make clear that they are archival works and they're not staged or photoshopped to make it clear that they're found images and found works. And so I'm also kind of pulling out different details from the photos. So in the background of this couple of photos here, where my nanny is dressed in a jacket and a turban, there is things like laundry lines, and on the laundry line is what I would call a banyan. A banyan is like an undershirt, a male undershirt. And so that's something you saw me wear one in the previous photo. I was wearing an undershirt. And in some of the newer images in this project too, I've sort of mimicked these just sort of details from the backgrounds of the photos. And I wanted to kind of emphasize this idea of the laundry line. But to the banyan for me, if I just go back, sorry to flip around, but if I go back to this image, the reason I chose to wear a banyan rather than wear a suit is what does it mean for me as a 21st century woman to be wearing a suit? Like, I wear pants and stuff all the time, so it's not really that exciting or that stand out for me to be dressed that way. But the banyan I think of as a masculine clothing, but also reminds me of my youth and my childhood, because this was an undershirt that I used to wear as a kid before I hit puberty, and also one that my dad still wears. So it's also kind of blurring the gender a little bit. And as I mentioned, I kind of wanted to put myself in the position of a child when also trying to understand these works. So that's why I'm dressed this way. And I've kind of flattened my chest as well to make myself appear almost like a younger version of myself here. Yeah, so I believe in this work that my grandmother is both pushing up against the patriarchal society that she's living in, but also complying into it. So as I mentioned, I kind of insert myself into the series, but also try to insert myself into the background. So this image is a direct sort of mimic of the first image that I showed you with the two girls in the background. So someone who's trying to really understand the performance, and also pay homage to my grandparents, who I didn't know very well. And in the text, I sort of do think of this project in a linear fashion. And in the text, I tend to sort of reveal towards the end that it's a fiction. So I say, you look so happy, like it looks different from the way that I knew you growing up. And then I also say, I wish I had asked you, but I couldn't. And my grandmother replies, yes, I know I know you did, Betty, but even if you had asked me, I wouldn't have told you, sort of thing. So that I'm kind of revealing that as well in the text. Yeah, and I wanted to include as well a photograph of my grandfather at sort of the end of the series, because as I mentioned, he is a huge figure as well. So he was actually the one who was interested in arts, although he was not an artist, he was interested. My parents like to say, like, he would have been super proud of this project and he would have been super supportive of me being an artist. Whereas Nani was, I'm sure she would have been supportive too, but she was actually quite reserved. And my parents like to say, like, oh, she would have not not understood what's the big deal about the photos, but she would have been supportive for sure. So that makes me feel good. So I wanted to pay homage to both of them in the sort of the way that I round off the series, by keeping that in there. So as I mentioned, I show a combination of reproductions of the photos as well as the original photos. I also like to show the photos that I took, often that are in color, sometimes excerpts from the dictionaries, and combine those in kind of a linear fashion in the exhibition space as well. This is a photo from the National Gallery in which these photos were included in Ottawa. And I'm just about to launch a photo book. It's my first photo book ever. And I'm really happy and excited because this project, like, because of its linear fashion, I always did think that it would be an ideal candidate for a book, because there is this kind of narrative that weaves through it that I think is important to just, yeah, unravel and unpack. And I think it's also an intimate project. So it would be really nice to kind of have to be able to spend time with it. So yeah, I'm super happy that I was able to work with my publisher, Robin York of Anchorless Press, who's an independent publisher. And we met a few years ago, and she was super supportive with the project. And then we received support from the Canada Council for the Arts and from CALC, from Council des Arts et Lettres de Québec. So thank you to that. And we actually have an English and a French version that's going to be launched on February 19th. So it's able to make the book in both languages. And the book includes as well a book wrap. So you might recognize this pattern from one of the photos as well, which is from the photo trunk that my parents keep our family photos in. So it's kind of an important emblem. And I was really happy to bring that design in. Want to thank my designer, Adam Sims, for that. And then I have a writer, Arushi Vats from India, who actually wrote a poem about the project. And I've included the poem on the book jacket cover of the English version as well. In addition, there's a glossary of Urdu terms that I look when I say like nani, khala, mamu, these kind of things. So there's a glossary of terms written by myself with some help from my parents with the actual Urdu writing is in my dad's writing. And then there's an essay that's written by myself that's pretty much talking about most of the things I just told you here, but I wanted to have that in essay format. Writing is a big part of my practice. And yeah, I think with this project too, I really, I can't always control the way the work is read, and it should be read however the viewer, kind of responds to the work. But at the same time, it felt important for me to have that information out there and available to people who want it. So yeah, so I wrote this essay. I had editorial support from my friend and PhD candidate and curator Noor Brangu. So we worked through kind of the ideas that I just talked about and put together this essay for you for the book. And yeah, it's like an illustrated essay. So there's a photo of me and Nani in there just to give you a sense of how the book unfolds. Just because I thought it would be nice to have a photo of the two of us. And this is a cute one. So yeah. All right, so the second project I wanted to discuss is Yours to Discover. It's called Yours to Discover, which is named after actually the Tourism Ontario slogan, past slogan anyway. And so some of the photos that I work with when I work with my family album, they kind of jump out at me. Of course, for Dear Nani, they were just exceptional images that I had to kind of make a project with. But some other images are more vernacular and more probably similar to what other people have in their home. So I was invited by a Toronto-based collective called Sad Art Store to work with the theme of being a tourist in your own home. And this was a few years ago. And I started to think about, when we think about tourism, who usually visits tourist sites. It's usually tourists, of course, and visitors to Canada, and also people who have newly decided to immigrate or live there. And my dad used to have a saying that when he moves to a new country or a new place, he likes to pretend he's a tourist and make sure that he takes time to see all the tourist sites. So these images are of a trip that my family made to Canada in the late 80s. So my parents and my sisters, so I was born in Canada, born in Pickering in Toronto area. And I was born in 1991, which was the year that my parents moved. But they came and they made a trip to Canada in the late 80s to visit my mom's sister who was living here already. And on that trip, they visited all the tourist sites, but specifically I'm looking at 3 tourist sites, which are Niagara Falls, and I'll just keep going, the CN Tower, and Cullen Gardens and Miniature Village. Cullen Gardens and Miniature Village is probably not one that's very known because it doesn't exist anymore. It was a miniature garden and had a lot of like topiary, and it was a beautiful garden that was in Whitby, Ontario. And I grew up in Durham region, so we used to go to Cullen Gardens a lot as kids. And so Cullen Gardens was really interesting to me because it's kind of almost like when you look at the photos of Cullen Gardens, it's almost like a miniature museum of the mundane. It's just like this photo that's in the middle is like of my parents and my family looking at this like modern of a very boring suburb in, North America. But that's also like, that was new to them, right? Because they didn't live in North America at the time. So, so for me, it was almost like when I saw this photo, it's kind of like they're almost like shopping for a house at this mini mini community, and we ended up moving to a community that looks like this. Like there's a lot of the houses in the suburban housing complex that my parents still live in look like this. So that was really interesting to me. And I'm thinking about all these different kind of ideas of like what are tourists and also what are my parents and my family learning from these sites. What are they learning about Canada when they visited them? And it was kind of this trip that made them decide that yes, we want to apply for immigration, and yes, we want to move to Canada. So I was thinking about like, what are they learning from these sites? So we have Cullen Gardens, so it's kind of like model miniature community. The CN Tower is kind of this whole idea of like, it was made in the late 70s. It was the tallest freestanding structure for a really long time. It was kind of like putting Canada on the like map in terms of innovation and engineering and modernity. And this was also like during the time of like multiculturalism, and they were really trying to bring in immigrants and professionals from all over and this kind of make this beautiful society that was very utopic of the time. And so I'm thinking about all of these things of like, okay, come to Canada, you'll get jobs, you can be a professional, you can live a good middle class life. Thinking about that in relation to these sites. As well with Niagara Falls, there's this whole idea of the kind of untamable landscape, beautiful, like untouched nature, and vast land that you can build on. But of course, anybody who's ever visited Niagara Falls, it's like very manufactured and very set up to be viewed a certain way. So these are the kind of things that I'm looking at when I'm looking at these 3 sites. And so with these, especially, I kind of started this project, it was conceived for public space. So I started with these 3 images in mind, and I was like, how do I project all of this kind of very loaded, and obviously like I'm thinking about ideals of citizenship and nationalism and how people see themselves as part of Canada. How do I make that clear for the viewer? So the way I chose to go about that was to again kind of enlarge the family photos and then work with the still life. And I brought in props. I brought in some of the original images, and then I brought in props like games that are also from my childhood, things like Disney movies that I grew up watching, which have similar ideals. And then each of the games, like Settlers of Catan, of course, is about making a settlement, coming to a new land, making settlement, and using the resources available to make settlements and grow your family, grow your community. I'll show a detail as well of that. So yeah, so like in this image, we have the Catan game board, and I've embedded photos of my family again at Niagara Falls within the game board as well. And it's kind of the other thing that's strange about in Catan, it's like you're moving to this land that has not been touched, and there's never any question of like who was there before, and you're mining resources to make your settlements, and it's just like you have resources from before, so you know how to do that, but there's no question of like who was there and whose land are you maybe taking. So that's also something I'm trying to implicate myself and my family's position as settler immigrants as well, and think about like, we were able to benefit from certain immigration policies, but who suffered at the same time, and who had their rights taken away at the same time that we were able to come and have a certain lifestyle. So I'm thinking about all of that as well at the same time. As well with Monopoly, I mean, capital. So thinking about, purchasing homes and how that also guarantees a certain middle-class lifestyle. And that's something that my parents were able to do when they moved here in the 90s. And I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to do that, but they were able to, and that secures a certain amount of wealth for their family as well. And so how do we secure that level of stability for our kids and for our families when we move to a new place? So I'm looking at all these things in relation to the family album. There's a lot of pushing and pulling. There's looking closely at details, there's pushing back. So some of the photos are just more details in which I'm covering up certain aspects in order to look more closely at other aspects. So it's a photo of my grandma, my mom and my nanny again also appears actually in this series. So you can kind of see even just in the difference of their outfits, like a different sort of journey for both of them. Nani never lived in Canada, but she visited. And then this is a photo of my parents on the Maid of the Mist, and I just kind of covered up their happy faces and just trying to also like poke humor and a bit of like uncanny in the photos as well. Yeah, and create different still lifes. I've also included books and research material which point to some of the research and thinking that I'm doing in relation to these images. And then of course I'm thinking about, so in this image from Cullen Gardens, we have a cop car pulling over a sports car. I was thinking about why, like who took this photo, probably my dad. Why was he interested in taking a picture of this like little mini cop car? And also if this place is supposed to be a model community, then why do we need police in the model community? Like who are they trying to, I don't know, protect or serve in this situation? So I started to then think about the parallels between policing and nationhood and nation building in this work as well. Again, in relation to kind of also in the suburb, which is seen as this like epitome of safety, yeah, in sort of a North American context. So yeah, so I'm pulling together different parts of my research as well as photos and then toys, because we also learn so much with our hands, and like as kids, that's also how we learn with toys. So and I wanted to think about that. Yeah, I'll skip that. So yeah, so this work has been shown originally. The first time it was shown was just the 3 images for a public space. So as I mentioned, I did conceive it with that in mind. And it was shown at the Peel Art Gallery Museum in Brampton, Ontario. And then one piece was shown in Toronto outside of near Artscape Young Place. And as public installations in Vancouver for Capture Photo Festival. But now I'm really happy that it's actually all the works are finally together. They're finally together. And I was able to show them, really happy to have a current exhibition at Pierre-François Ouellette in Montreal. And the works are there, and then they'll actually be going to Vancouver later this spring. So yeah, so the works are there. And I also made a new kind of site-specific mini billboard because I wanted to pay homage to kind of the way that the photos had been shown in the public space. So I made a mini billboard for the gallery. And so this image is kind of a challenging one, and I always wanted to work with it, but it's like a complex image just visually on its own. So what's happening in the image is my family is looking, so they're behind a fence and they're looking at this like miniature amusement park. But I always just found it kind of sad, like the way that my sister is like hidden behind the fence and she can't access the amusement park. And so I wanted to kind of make this disruption between the fun and then my family. So it's kind of like there's fun over here, but you have to look behind the fence to see the fun, and you can't actually participate in the fun. So yeah, trying to kind of make these subtle uncanny gestures. And although the series is very colorful and it pops and it's fun, there is play there, but I'm also like looking very critically at some of these places because they're designed to be fun, and I can't help but think like, okay, but who is trying to make it fun, and what are they trying to cover up with the fun? Like, what is the fun trying to cover up? So those are the things I'm thinking about with this series.
In a lot of your writing and some of your previous exhibitions, it's very deeply personal. And these 2 projects, of course, you're drawing on family history. You're drawing on kind of created spaces where you're creating conversations with loved ones that couldn't happen. Do you feel pressure to kind of put a lot of yourself forward, or how do you balance that kind of separation between what's on the exhibit and what you kind of keep to yourself? Or is there a balance? Do you just feel like viewers or there's more of a engagement when it is all out there, or is that something you think about at all?
It definitely is. This was the part when I wasn't going to talk about Darren, but no, I will show an image. So I have a kind of almost like, I mean, I think with some of my newer work, I'm trying to problematize working with the family album as well. And I almost have what I almost see as kind of a parallel practice of text work that's purely text and like design based in which like sometimes I make these kind of graphic design pieces or like statements that address issues that I'm having with working with the family album, also kind of like being asked to be the face of like the immigrant experience is very daunting and very also not really fair because everybody has their own experience. So these are my experiences and I can't really speak for everybody. So this is from I'll just show some photos of this is a recent exhibition I had at Decibel in Montreal, which combined some photos from Yours to Discover and some text pieces as well as some newer video works that are working with photos and videos and photos that I captured of my family album that is a little more complex and kind of dealing with issues like class and women's roles in the home. But I also included, I think I have another photo, do I? Maybe not. I have other text works like this. So this is kind of sometimes what I do to almost like, I think I said, I see it as a parallel practice. So it's a moment for me to like reflect on like, what am I making? What am I doing? Also, how do I do this? How could I possibly speak for anybody? And yeah, it's important for me to kind of also voice the frustration. I mean, I do it to myself. Like I love making the work that I make, but sometimes it's dealing with a lot of heavy issues. And I feel like I almost need to also address that on its own to get that out there. Yeah.
Thanks. This was an unplanned. It's great that you had all these images for that question. It was not discussed before. But the other question I had was also about intimacy. I'm really looking forward to the book. You know, when I see a kind of exhibition installation, it's very kind of present. It's very bold, especially for Dear Nani. There was multiple pieces, kind of a very multimedia kind of piece. I'm really looking forward to the book because it is so intimate. I feel like I'm going to be able to have an experience of looking, you look through family photo albums. I'll be looking through kind of your family photo albums and your interpretation of that in a way. So I guess, what do you feel like the book brings more to the project than a presentation or kind of a couple pieces on a wall or a couple of diptychs in a group show? Or what do you think the book will kind of add to the project, to sum up?
I mean, I think like I haven't actually had the chance to show even all of the photos in this project altogether because it is so layered. I just haven't had the opportunity to actually show them all in the gallery space. And I've also added to them, like I started this project in 2017, but like I've shot more photos for it in 2020, I think. So like, yeah, so a lot of the works that are in the book haven't been shown. And two, because it was like, it's such a, I mean, I'm so grateful to be able to make the work, but it was also a difficult work to make because there's many different ways you can take, the gender performance. Like of course, there's a queer reading as well to the works. But I wanted to like stay true to what I actually felt was happening. And I didn't want to like, there could have been a queer reading on it, but I wanted to look at this reading, which I felt like was more true to my family and to my also like cultural reading. And I felt like also that would have been swept away if I hadn't addressed it in that way. So that was really important to me to kind of maintain my ground on that. And it was hard to do it, honestly. And it took a lot of like the extra research. So that's why I was able to talk about it for 40 minutes, because it's a lot of time like thinking about all these different aspects and like doing the research behind it. And I really wanted all of that to have a place to like live together. And then even through like, I exhibited the work. I also exhibited the work quite quickly after I made it. And that can be kind of intense sometimes because I almost didn't really feel like I had the time and space to feel like it was really resolved before it was already in public. So that's why I ended up making more photos just 2 years ago. Because I felt like there was a need for more context. And after showing it, a lot of people, when they see the images, they think it's me doing the performance. Like they think it's all like fabricated and it's all Photoshop. And so I was like, okay, I need to make clear that these are found photos. So even like including images like my hand with the original photo, like I was hoping that that would help just make it more clear. So also through showing the work and through having conversations with people, I was kind of like, okay, maybe this is missing, maybe this is, yeah, needed for the project. And then, as I mentioned, like I really wanted to write that essay, and I wrote a version of it in 2017, but I wasn't happy with it. And I wanted to take the time to be happy with it. And I needed a bit of support and help, but I also knew that I wanted to write it myself. I didn't want to hire someone to write it. I wanted it to come from me. Yeah, I hired my friend Nurbangu to help me with that, because she, studies South Asian art. She's a curator, and I also needed that like critical lens because I'm an artist and I write in a personal way, but I actually wanted this to be a little bit more of an academic-ish piece. So it's a bit more of that, more factual. It's not poetic the way that the text in the work is. It's more of a factual essay. And I wanted to have that there. So
I'm super looking forward to getting a copy. Thank you again so much for coming on. Thank you so much for being a part of this exhibition, being a part of this process. For more information, you can always check out portraitcanada.ca, and to see the exhibition will be on for the rest of February. Thank you.